3 days before stepping onto the Gainbridge floor, Caitlin Clark could barely move without pain. A back injury had forced her to miss an entire game against Portland, and the questions were mounting about whether she'd even play against Golden State. When a reporter asked Coach Stephanie White directly about her star player's condition, something shifted in the moment. White's face tightened. Her words became carefully measured. She talked about monitoring, about listening to medical staff, about being cautious. She said absolutely nothing useful. It was the kind of answer that screamed something was being hidden, and for a few hours before tip-off, the entire conversation in Indianapolis centered on one thing: what exactly was Caitlin Clark's physical condition? The uncertainty hung over the arena like a question mark. And then Clark walked onto the court and answered that question in the most brutal way possible, not with words. With a third-quarter performance so dominant that it didn't just win a basketball game, it sent a message to every coach in the WNBA that something had fundamentally shifted. Let's start with the moment that set everything in motion, because it's the foundation for understanding what came next. 3 days before this game, Caitlin Clark's back was tight enough that she couldn't play. Not questionable, not limited minutes. Actually ruled out. Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement. The entire Portland game happened without her, and for anyone paying attention to the WNBA, that's a significant event. This is not a player who gets rest. This is not someone who takes games off casually. When Caitlin Clark doesn't play, it means something is genuinely wrong. So naturally, when the pregame press conference rolled around, somebody in that room had the obvious question ready. A reporter stepped up and asked Stephanie White directly, "How is Caitlin Clark's back? Is she injured, or is it something else entirely?" What happened next is worth examining frame by frame because the response told you absolutely everything while technically saying nothing at all. White's body language shifted immediately. Her jaw tightened. She looked directly at the camera and started talking about deferring to the medical team. She said she doesn't disclose information that hasn't already been disclosed by the franchise. She talked about monitoring the situation. She said they were being cautious. She used every possible phrase that means, "I'm not telling you anything useful," while still technically answering the question. The entire delivery was uncomfortable. It wasn't the smooth, rehearsed answer of a coach who's confident in their player's status. It was the answer of someone who either doesn't fully know what's happening behind the scenes or doesn't want to say it publicly. And that distinction matters enormously. When a head coach gets asked about a star player's injury status and responds with that level of visible discomfort, it creates a narrative all on its own. The press conference became the pregame story. Every analyst in the league was speculating. Is she playing on borrowed time? Is she pain management? Is this something that could flare up mid-game? Is she even going to be effective if she does step on the court? The uncertainty became the dominant conversation. Golden State, meanwhile, was seeing this happen in real time. They knew Clark might be playing through something. They knew she hadn't played in days. They knew there was a physical element they could potentially exploit. From their perspective, they were walking into a game where Indiana's franchise player was dealing with an unspecified back issue that had sidelined her completely just 72 hours earlier. The Golden State organization has depth. They have bench scoring. They have a defensive scheme that had been working throughout the early season. They came to Indianapolis thinking they had a genuine shot at a road win, and the pregame narratives about Clark's physical condition only reinforced that belief. No healthy Caitlin Clark and they're competitive. A compromised Caitlin Clark and they might actually win. That's the advantage they were thinking about as they walked into Gainbridge. That's the narrative heading into the opening tip. But here's what makes what happened next so remarkable. Whatever was actually happening with that back, whether it was partially healed, being managed through modern sports medicine, or just taped up and sent out there on pure competitive will, Clark responded to the uncertainty and the speculation in a very specific way. She didn't ease into the game. She didn't show caution. She didn't prove that her back was fine by playing conservative basketball. She did the opposite. She came out and played like someone who had been locked in a room for 3 days and finally got released. No managing, no restrictions, just Caitlin Clark at full throttle against a team that suddenly realized they had made a serious miscalculation about what they were walking into. The comfortable narrative about potentially exploiting an injury evaporated the moment she touched the basketball. The opening quarter was deceptive in the best way possible because it didn't reveal a single thing about what was coming. Indiana won at 19-18, 1 point, absolutely nothing that suggested the second half was going to be an absolute destruction. If anything, the first quarter told the story of a completely normal basketball game between two teams with legitimate talent and legitimate strategies. Golden State came out with a game plan. They were moving the ball. They were finding gaps in Indiana's coverage. They were rotating on defense in a way that made Clark work for everything without giving her those wide-open looks she'd been converting at historic rates in her previous few performances. Tiffany Hayes, Golden State's standout wing, was active from the opening possession. She was attacking downhill. She was making reads. The Valkyries' defense was constructed around making Clark's life difficult, and in those opening 12 minutes, they were actually executing that plan effectively. Clark, for her part, wasn't forcing anything. She wasn't trying to prove that her back was fine by launching three-pointers or taking over the game immediately. She was playing basketball. She was pushing pace in transition when the opportunity presented itself. She was finding the right pass. She was getting her legs under her in a way that looked completely natural for someone who had just missed a game with a physical issue. Nothing felt strained. Nothing felt like she was compensating. It felt like a player easing back into action after a few days off. The first quarter ended tied, and if you had walked out of the building at that moment, you would have told someone else that this was a competitive basketball game where both teams had come in prepared and neither had established clear superiority. That was accurate. It was also the last time anyone could say that with confidence. The second quarter is where the complications started. This is where Golden State made a run that genuinely threatened Indiana and where the narrative about Clark's comeback almost took a completely different turn. The Valkyries outscored the Fever 26-18 in the second quarter. That's an 8-point swing that accumulated into an 8-point lead, their biggest lead of the entire game. And in that moment, with halftime approaching, the entire feel of the evening shifted. The crowd at Gainbridge, which had been buzzing with the electricity of Clark's return, started going quiet. The uncertainty from the pre-game press conference was suddenly feeling justified. Maybe White's evasiveness made sense. Maybe Clark wasn't actually ready. Maybe Golden State's strategy of attacking her physical condition was going to work. Indiana looked disjointed in those stretches. The defensive rotations were breaking down. The offense wasn't generating the clean looks that had defined their previous two victories. Clark was on the court for portions of the second quarter, and you could see her fighting it. The reads were there. The basketball intelligence was functioning. But Golden State's defensive scheme was making her work harder for every inch of space. When Indiana needed someone to break through the wall that Golden State had constructed, nobody did. The supporting cast wasn't generating enough. Boston wasn't imposing herself. The role players weren't stepping up in the way they needed to. Halftime came with Golden State in front, and the narrative had completely inverted. Now the story was different. Now it was about whether a star player returning from injury could actually lead her team to victory against a team with legitimate depth and legitimate schemes. The questions were forming. The concern was real. The story of Clark's remarkable return was starting to feel like it might have a disappointing ending. And then the teams came back out for the third quarter. This is where it gets interesting, because what happened in the third quarter deserves to be examined possession by possession, because this quarter is the pivot point where one player decided that a basketball game was going to end with a specific result, and nobody in the arena was going to stop it. The moment Indiana came back out for the second half, something had shifted in Clark's body language. You could see it the instant she stepped onto the court. She wasn't easing into possessions anymore. She wasn't still managing her physical condition. She was attacking the very first possession like it was personally offended her. She pushed pace immediately in transition, getting the ball up the floor before Golden State's defense could even set their feet. The fast break converted. The building woke up. 6 fast break points on just 2 attempts for the entire night, and both of them came in this third quarter at moments when Indiana desperately needed momentum to turn in their direction. Then the three-pointers started falling. Clark hit her first third quarter three, and the release point was so clean that you could tell immediately this was a different player than the one who had been working through Golden State's defense in the second quarter. The hand release was barely contested because Golden State's defender couldn't get there in time. The kind of shot that goes in when a player is locked in at a level that literally cannot be defended. Not defended well. Cannot be defended at all. The crowd erupted. Golden State called a timeout to try to reset their defensive scheme. They came back out, and it didn't matter. On Indiana's next meaningful possession, Clark drove downhill with such aggression that Hayes had no choice but to foul her. She walked to the free throw line with the calm of someone who had completely taken over the game's emotional frequency. She converted both. Golden State came down and missed. Clark was already pushing pace again before the rebound had finished bouncing. She was operating at a speed that Golden State couldn't match anymore. Then came the moment that defines what Caitlin Clark is as a competitor. She picked up a technical foul. The exact circumstances can be debated. Whether the call was right, whether she reacted to something a defender did, whether the official was too quick to escalate, all of that can be discussed. What cannot be debated is what she did immediately after it happened. She turned around. She set up the next play. She made the next right basketball decision like the technical foul had happened in a different building to a different person. Goldfish mentality in its most visible form. Something happened. She processed it. She forgot it. She moved on. Then within minutes came the flagrant foul. Back-to-back incidents. 2 official actions against her within the same quarter. Most players exit emotionally from a game after that happens. They let the officials live in their head for the rest of the night. They lose focus. They become frustrated. Clark did the opposite. She processed both incidents and kept cooking. The fire that generated those incidents is the exact same fire that generated 29 Indiana points in a single quarter. You take one and you get the other. There's no version where you separate them. Aliyah Boston was the beneficiary of every defensive attention shift Clark created. With Golden State collapsing on Clark at the three-point line and in the paint, Boston was catching feeds in the post with single defenders. She was converting second-chance opportunities that came directly from the gravitational pull that Clark creates just by existing on the court. The third quarter was Clark and Boston working in absolute perfect tandem. Clark creating confusion, Boston converting results. Golden State scored 17 in the third. 17. A team that had scored 26 in the second quarter was reduced to 17 points when Clark decided the game was over. Here's something that doesn't get discussed enough in basketball analysis because it's difficult to quantify and even more difficult to teach. There's a specific type of player who, when they get hit with adversity in the middle of a game, when an official makes a call they disagree with, when a physical incident occurs that disrupts their rhythm, they fall apart emotionally. The official becomes the villain of their narrative. The call becomes the reason they can't perform. The frustration becomes the dominant emotion. These players let external moments completely derail their internal focus, and by the time they recover emotionally, they've lost 4 or 5 possessions of production, and their team's momentum has shifted. Then there are players like Caitlin Clark, who operate on a completely different emotional frequency. The technical foul came in the third quarter when everything was starting to accelerate. Clark had just hit a 3. She had just drawn a foul and converted at the line. The momentum was building. Golden State was falling apart, and then something happened that caused an official to blow the whistle and assess a technical. The exact circumstances around it can be debated forever. Maybe Clark said something, maybe she reacted to contact. Maybe the official was too quick to escalate a tense moment. What matters is what happened next, because this is the moment that reveals character. Most players would have stood there. Most players would have stared at the official. Most players would have said something under their breath that they'd regret later. Most players would have spent the next 2 or 3 possessions thinking about that call instead of thinking about basketball. Clark did something completely different. She turned around. She immediately set up the next play. She made the basketball decision that the moment required. She communicated with her teammates. She executed. And the next time Indiana got the ball, she was still locked in, still aggressive, still playing at the same elite level. That's not normal. Then, a few possessions later, came the flagrant foul. A second incident. A second official action against her within the same third quarter. 2 moments where most players emotionally exit the game. 2 moments where a lesser competitor lets the officials live in their head for the rest of the night, replaying the calls, thinking about fairness, allowing frustration to dictate their next few possessions. Clark processed it and moved on. She literally did not care, not in an arrogant way, in a focused way. The only thing that mattered was the next possession and the next one after that. This is what separates great players from legendary ones. It's not the skill. Plenty of players have skill. It's the ability to process adversity in real time and move forward without carrying the emotional baggage. It's what sports psychologists call the goldfish mentality. Something happens, you forget it happened, you move on to the next moment. Most human beings struggle with this concept their entire lives. Caitlin Clark does it in the middle of playoff intensity games while being watched by thousands of people, and knowing that every moment is being recorded and analyzed. The fire that generated those two incidents is the exact same fire that generated 29 Indiana points in a single quarter. You cannot separate them. If you take away the aggression and the competitive intensity that led to the technical and the flagrant, you also take away the ability to create havoc on both ends of the court. You take away the willingness to attack downhill without hesitation. You take away the mentality that says, I'm going to impose my will on this game no matter who is defending me. These are connected. The incidents didn't slow her down. They didn't distract her. They were simply moments that happened in a performance that was already in progress, and she handled them with the emotional control of a player who understands that the only thing that matters is what happens next. That's the moment that matters, not the technical, not the flagrant. The moment immediately after, when she turned around and played the next possession like nothing had happened. One thing that gets overlooked in individual performances is how much the supporting cast has to operate perfectly for that individual performance to even be possible. Clark's third quarter explosion didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because Aliyah Boston was positioned perfectly to benefit from every defensive shift. It happened because the rest of Indiana's roster was executing their roles. It happened because Golden State's depth advantage, which had carried them through the second quarter, completely disappeared when the third quarter started. Let's break this down, because the story of this game is not just about Clark. It's about what Clark's presence does to the entire offensive and defensive structure of a basketball team. Aliyah Boston finished the night with 20 points on 8 of 15 shooting and 16 rebounds. Those are not the numbers of a supporting player. Those are the numbers of a co-star who is having an exceptional performance. But here's the key detail. Those numbers came directly as a byproduct of what Clark was creating on the court. When Golden State's defense was focused on stopping Clark, when defenders were collapsing on her at the three-point line and in the paint, Boston was catching passes in the post with single defenders trying to guard her. She was converting those opportunities. She was protecting the glass. She was finishing second-chance plays that came directly from the gravitational pull that Clark creates just by existing on the court. In the third quarter specifically, Boston was the beneficiary of multiple possession, where the defensive attention shift was so pronounced that she had open lanes to the basket and open spaces on the glass. She capitalized. She gave Indiana multiple easy possessions in a quarter when they needed momentum to shift completely. The chemistry between Clark and Boston operating at that level is devastating for any defensive scheme. You cannot defend both of them simultaneously. You have to pick one, and whatever you do, the other one becomes lethal. Then there's Kelsey Mitchell's role in the fourth quarter when the game was essentially over and Indiana just needed to close it out cleanly. Mitchell finished with 19 points, which sounds like a meaningful contribution until you look at the shooting splits. 4 of 10 from the field, that's 40%, but 11 of 11 from the free throw line, that's 100%. Mitchell didn't have a great shooting night. She understood that when your shot is not falling, the most valuable thing you can do is attack contact and get to the line. She drew 5 fouls on the night. Every single free throw went in. She took 19 points from a game where she wasn't shooting the ball particularly well, and she did it through aggression and understanding situational basketball. Now let's talk about what happened to Golden State's bench, which had been their strength throughout the first half. Caitlin Chen came off the bench and was converting at 64% efficiency. Tiffany Hayes kept finding her spots. The Valkyries bench ended up with 43 bench points on the night, which should be a winning number against most teams in this league. The depth advantage that Golden State had built through the first 24 minutes completely failed to carry them through the remainder of the game because Indiana's starters, particularly Clark and Boston, shifted into a gear that no bench unit in the WNBA can match. The Golden State starters, meanwhile, shot 37% from the field collectively. Veronica Burton finished with 17 points by drawing 6 fouls herself. Tiffany Hayes gave Golden State 19 on 7 of 13 shooting. Those are respectable numbers individually, but when your starting lineup is shooting 37% collectively, that's a recipe for loss against a team with Indiana's top-end talent. The bench depth that had been so effective in the second quarter couldn't overcome the massive deficiency in starter efficiency in the third and fourth quarters. That's the supporting cast story. It's not that Clark carried a bad team. It's that Clark's performance elevated everyone around her, and Golden State's supporting cast couldn't overcome what happens when that elevation reaches this level. Let's talk about what the numbers actually mean, because statistics in basketball can tell you the story if you know how to read them. Clark finished the night with 22 points on 7 of 15 shooting, which is 47%. 4 of 9 from 3, which is 44%. 4 of 5 from the free throw line. 9 assists, 8 fouls drawn, 6 fast break points on 2 attempts, 1 technical foul, 1 flagrant foul. These numbers paint a very specific picture of what happened. The most significant number on that stat sheet is not the points. It's not the assists. It's the 4 of 9 from three-point range at 44%. This is the number that keeps growing in significance week by week because it represents a fundamental shift in how the WNBA has to defend Caitlin Clark. 3 games in a row now of elite three-point shooting from Clark after the early season struggles when she was shooting 20% from deep. In that early season stretch, the entire league was adjusting their scouting reports in real time. Teams were sagging off her aggressively. Teams were loading up on the paint. Teams were daring her to beat them from distance because they genuinely believed she couldn't do it at a high enough rate. That strategy is now completely obsolete. 44% from 3 on 9 attempts in a game she almost didn't play because of a back injury is the kind of performance that resets every defensive game plan in the league simultaneously. Coaches are going to get together in their offices this week. They're going to watch the film. They're going to see 44% from 3, and they're going to realize that the strategy of sagging off has completely failed. Now they have to defend her as a legitimate three-point threat, which means they have to stay attached to her on the perimeter, which means they can't help in the paint, which means Aliyah Boston is going to have more space in the post. It's a defensive puzzle that doesn't have a solution. Every answer creates a different problem. The 9 assists extend a pattern through this season that is fundamentally redefining how we describe Caitlin Clark as a player. She is not just a shooter who happens to pass. She is a genuine floor general whose passing vision operates at a speed that no defense in this league has figured out how to consistently counter. 22 assists across her last 2 games combined. Her teammates are not just open when they cut. They are open before they have finished their cut because Clark has already read where they're going and released the ball. That's not common. That's elite. The 8 fouls drawn is the number that represents her aggression level and her ability to attack downhill without hesitation. She's creating contact and generating free throw attempts at a rate that means defenses have to be careful about how aggressively they attack her. The 6 fast break points on 2 attempts is a representation of her ability to push pace and capitalize on transition opportunities when they present themselves. But here's the number that won't be celebrated and really should be examined more closely. 6 turnovers. That's the one statistical blemish on what was otherwise a perfect performance. Clark is playing so fast and so instinctively that turnovers are the natural byproduct of the style. She's throwing passes that hit teammates in stride before those teammates have completely turned their heads to expect it. She's making reads that are so advanced that sometimes the execution doesn't match the vision. Against Golden State, 6 turnovers was not punished because Golden State's defense didn't have an answer for her overall impact. But Indiana's next opponent is the New York Liberty, a team with genuine defensive infrastructure and elite perimeter pressure. A team that is built specifically to force turnovers and create chaos in transition. 6 turnovers is going to be brutally punished by that level of defense. That's the one adjustment that has to happen before Indiana plays the Liberty. That's the only real vulnerability this performance exposed. Here's what matters when we step back and look at the entire season trajectory. Indiana Fever is 5-2. Both losses have been overtime games decided in the final possessions. The 5 wins have been increasingly dominant and increasingly complete. This is not a team that's winning close games through luck. This is a team that's winning dominant games through structure and execution. Caitlin Clark is healthy. That's the foundation everything else is built on. She came back from a back injury that was significant enough to keep her out of a game, and she responded with a performance that sent a message to every franchise in the league. Whatever was happening with that back 3 days ago, it's resolved. She's back, and she's not playing a cautious version of basketball. She's playing aggressive, full-throttle basketball. Aliyah Boston is putting up back-to-back double-doubles. 20 points and 16 rebounds last night. Her offensive rating of 122 against a defensive rating of 84 puts her in an elite two-way impact category that only the very best players in this league reach. She's not just a beneficiary of Clark's presence. She's operating at a level that makes Indiana's front court one of the most difficult matchups in the entire league. Opponents have to choose between defending her in the post or respecting Clark on the perimeter, and there's no defensive scheme in basketball that has figured out how to do both simultaneously. Kelsey Mitchell is understanding her role and executing it perfectly. She's drawing fouls at a rate that generates 19 points even on nights when her shot is not falling. She's playing free throw shooting at 100% rates. She's the kind of role player that championship teams need, someone who understands their responsibility and executes it without trying to do more than they're capable of. The system is working. Coach Stephanie White stood in front of a camera before this game and gave an answer that told you absolutely nothing while technically saying something. She was uncomfortable. She was evasive. She was managing information. Whatever she was uncertain about, whatever she was handling behind the scenes, the player resolved it by walking onto the floor and playing 40 minutes of brilliant basketball. 40 minutes. Not 30, not limited minutes. Full, aggressive 40 minutes. A technical foul and a flagrant foul didn't slow her down. They were moments that happened within a larger context of dominance. 9 assists, 4 three-pointers, 22 points, 8 fouls drawn. She imposed her will on the game so completely that when it ended, there was no question about which team had the better player and which team was going to win. Indiana is 5-2 with a championship-level player finally healthy and operating at full capacity. Boston is in the form of her career. The supporting cast is understanding their roles. The coaching staff is managing egos and minutes and load management effectively. This is not just a good team. This is a team that looks like it could sustain this level of performance throughout the season if health cooperates and execution remains consistent. The big picture is that Indiana Fever looks like a contender, not a surprise story, not a Cinderella team, a genuine contender with the kind of talent density and system consistency that wins in the playoffs. Clark is the reason that's possible, but she's not the only reason. The entire organization is executing at a level that suggests they understand what winning in this league requires. Let's talk about what Caitlin Clark told the entire WNBA in the most direct language possible with this performance. Because this game wasn't just about winning a basketball game against Golden State. This game was about sending a message. 3 days before this game, she couldn't play. There was uncertainty. There was speculation. There was a head coach being visibly uncomfortable in front of cameras because the medical situation was unclear, or at least unclear enough that transparency felt risky. Every team in this league was wondering the same thing. Is Caitlin Clark actually healthy? Is she going to be affected by this back issue for the rest of the season? Is there a window where we can attack her physically because she's not at full strength? She answered that question by playing 40 minutes of dominant basketball against a team with legitimate defensive schemes and legitimate depth. She answered it by shooting 44% from 3. She answered it by distributing 9 assists. She answered it by drawing 8 fouls and playing with such aggression that she picked up a technical and a flagrant and didn't let either one affect her focus. That's the message. I'm not compromised. I'm not managing. I'm not going to be the reason Indiana loses games. I'm healthy, I'm focused, and I'm coming for every team in this league at full capacity. The next real test is 1 week away. New York Liberty is coming to Indianapolis, and they are the kind of defensive team that Indiana has to prove they can beat in the playoffs. The Liberty have genuine defensive infrastructure. They have elite perimeter pressure. They are built specifically to force turnovers and create chaos in transition. If Indiana goes to New York and wins that game, the narrative completely changes. If Indiana goes there and loses, there's still a conversation about whether they can win when they're playing against the absolute best defenses in the league. But here's what's different heading into that game compared to the start of this week. There's no uncertainty about Caitlin Clark's health. There's no speculation about whether she's affected by injury. There's no question about her availability or her willingness to impose her will on a basketball game. She settled that conversation last night by playing the basketball version of a mic drop performance. The New York Liberty saw this game. Every coach in this league saw this game. Every team that's planning for playoff matchups against Indiana is watching the film and realizing that they're going to have to find a way to defend a player who just shot 44% from three and distributed 9 assists in a game that mattered. That's not a solvable problem. That's a reality that has to be managed. Caitlin Clark just told the entire WNBA in the most direct language possible exactly how ready she is for the rest of the season. She's back, all the way back. Not managing, not cautious, back at full capacity and ready to take over games at the highest level. The league should be very, very worried, not because of any one performance, because of what this performance represents about the trajectory of this team and the commitment of this player. She came back from injury and immediately proved that she's not just the most talented player in this league. She's the most competitive. She's the most mentally tough. She's the one player who can impose her will on a basketball game so completely that opposing teams have to completely restructure their defensive schemes just to have a chance. 5-2, both losses were overtime. Both losses were close. The trajectory is clear. The health is resolved. The commitment is obvious. Indiana Fever is not just a good team. They're a team that looks ready to compete for a championship if they can maintain this level of execution and health. Stephanie White stood in front of a camera and couldn't bring herself to clearly confirm Caitlin Clark's status. Whatever she was managing, whatever medical situation was happening behind the scenes, Clark resolved it completely by walking onto the floor and playing brilliant, dominant, aggressive basketball for 40 minutes straight. The technical foul and the flagrant foul didn't slow her down. They were moments in a larger context of complete control. 9 assists, 4 3-pointers, 22 points, 8 fouls drawn. She imposed her will so thoroughly that Golden State never had a chance once the third quarter started. Aliyah Boston benefited from every shift. Kelsey Mitchell executed her role perfectly. The entire team performed at a level that suggests championship-tier basketball. Indiana is 5-2 with a star player finally healthy and operating at full capacity. The New York Liberty are coming. The real test is 1 week away. But Caitlin Clark just told the entire WNBA exactly how ready she is. She's back, all the way back, and the league should be absolutely terrified.